name is Pam Helmly. I'm the founder and chief science officer of Wellnicity and Neurogistics. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how we ended up here and about our company. Oh my goodness, my parents were so overwhelmed. They had a baby that, quit taking a bottle at 5 months of age and fed herself. And, I had so many sensory issues. I couldn't tolerate water on my face or my hair being washed without screaming, and loud noises were terrifying. And I can't imagine what they thought when they would find me in a rocking chair with a blanket on my head, rocking myself for hours on end. But they probably were a little bit relieved because I was quiet. At first, they called in the army. The pediatrician would come over and watch and go, well, that's okay, as long as she's getting enough food, it didn't really matter. And then when she was going to college, she took me to the University of Houston Child Development Center to see if they could figure out what was wrong with me. And we did all kind of tests, mostly them observing me. I thought it was rather stupid, but the outcome was just keep her really busy. Sleep was just so difficult. As a baby, I slept 12 hours and I was awake 12 hours. So my mom said she was so relieved when I finally went to bed at 5 p.m., but then at 5 a.m. we were back at it for another 12 hours together. But most of my life I didn't sleep. When I was at my grandparents' house, she had this wonderful wall unit air conditioner, and it was very cold and dark, and I could go into her formal living room and get in a rocking chair and rock for hours. And it was like sensory deprivation. It was so perfect. So I really loved that. And at their house, the sound of the air conditioner, the window units running, was really helpful for sleep. So I really enjoyed that as a kid. When I was 3, my older brother, he was 2 years older, went to kindergarten, and I was devastated that I didn't get to go too. So my parents had to find a kindergarten that would take me. And when I was doing the testing at kindergarten, they figured out that I was dyslexic. But what they kept saying to me is, draw this house, and the window's not on that side, Pam, it's on the other side. And I thought, well, I really want to go to kindergarten, so I'm just going to draw it on the other side so I get to go, because otherwise I'm going to fail, but I know that they're wrong. There were so many things, like I would reach on the wrong side of the door for the doorknob. As a teenager, I always had bruises on my hip bones from hitting the doorknob because I think it's on the other side. And of course, reading was a challenge because I got to where I would skip the 3-letter word, so you miss sometimes the intent when it's supposed to be was not or was. You can completely miss that. But I just jumped over it. Sometimes I had to reread things. But dyslexia is tricky. It affects the way you walk. It can affect so many things about your life. And eventually, I think that it definitely gets better the more that you exercise and practice left brain, right brain activities. For my whole life, I will have to continue integrating my brain, left brain to right brain, to keep things on task. So in early elementary school, my family moved to the Netherlands. And it was such a positive move for a child like me because I was in a very small classroom. I think we had 12 kids in the classroom at the American International School. And we played 3 instruments, we learned 3 languages, we walked to the beach, every day for lunch. And it was so exciting. We moved all the time. There was something interesting going on. And distraction is great for someone with that many sensory issues because you feel like you want to crawl out of your skin. But if there's something interesting going on, you can focus on that. The hardest thing for me about living in the Netherlands were the wool t-shirts that we had to wear under our clothes because it was so cold. The refrigerators in the Netherlands are so small. We shopped every day for fresh foods, and we walked everywhere. The weekends, they had such beautiful parks. We rode our bikes, and everyone was outside. It was just such a healthy lifestyle. You have to shop every day, of course, because you have a college-sized refrigerator. I was much healthier in the Netherlands. I was quite a sick child in the United States, but moving over there, I don't really remember going to the doctor very much. There were so many, everything was different. The foods were fresh and healthy, even the meats, and they don't do very much dairy, and that was a real benefit. They didn't have ketchup, so we had mayonnaise. I was sensitive to tomatoes and didn't know that either. But also, they really practiced preventative medicine there. I mean, if they keep you well, then you're not costing the state money because it's socialized medicine. So it was a very healthy plan. My mom, put tryptophan on my oatmeal to help me sleep. And many times when you get sick over there, it's all about the cod liver oil capsules, which we know are anti-inflammatory and really help your immune system. So it was a very positive move moving over there. When I came back to the United States, it was really difficult. We consumed so much dairy over here. Everything is cheese-based or milk-based, and of course the advertising is really big, for the dairy industry. And I just kept getting sicker and sicker, so I spent a lot of time at the ear, nose, and throat doctors. I was losing hearing in my left ear due to all the issues from the fluid. And fortunately, they tested me for foods, and we spent a lot of time, a removal diet and then putting them back in. And we figured out that I was sensitive to wheat and dairy, but there really weren't alternatives. And I'm not sure whether we really had the money to do something different, for me to have a completely different diet. And it's really hard sometimes for families to have two completely different meals. So that wasn't taken out of my diet, and I was pretty sick. 3 allergy shots a week, sometimes twice a week. It just really depended. The teen years were pretty crazy. You have teachers that don't understand you. You don't respond to stressors correctly. And by now, I know now that I've eaten up all these neurotransmitters. And so in order to feel anything, you do big, scary things. So my brother and I were quite the adrenaline junkies. We skied fast. We drove our cars fast. My friends, I had so many friends because if you wanted to have a wild and crazy time, call Pam. So we had a lot of fun, but it was also dangerous. Fortunately, it didn't involve substances, but it was some crazy stunts that we pulled in high school, and it was me trying to feel something. And most of my friends didn't really know about my sensory issues. They just knew that I didn't ever wear blue jeans or wore corduroys because they were softer. When your brain's imbalanced, it affects so many things. Your brain regulates everything. So my hormones weren't imbalanced, but I didn't know that. We didn't test hormones back then, certainly not in a 17 or 18-year-old. But it did affect things. Didn't start my period until I was really pretty old. And it's, that just always compounds things. When you have sensory issues, a dyslexia, an imbalanced brain, hormones, wow, what a hot mess. So I head off to college, and I was very excited to go away to school. And I'm thinking that I can build my own world. And I move into the dorm at A&M, and I was so blessed to have a childhood friend to be my college roommate. We didn't know we were going to be roommates, but we ran into each other the very first week of school. And the reason that it was so amazing is she was so gracious with all of my idiosyncrasies. So I'm realizing how other people sleep because we shared a room. We were in the same room, and that not everybody did all the steps in the bathroom that I did, but that she fell asleep normally and woke up at a normal time, and she could wear jeans every single day with a belt. I was astounded that could happen. And, I cocooned my body up in a blanket so tight so that I could go to sleep, and I had to have multiple layers so there would be enough weight to calm my nervous system. And, she didn't make fun of me. It was really a blessing. Dating was difficult. Guys want to touch you lightly and, be kind to you. And it was really tough for me. And I did date a lot. I dated in high school and college. But ultimately, I went back to a guy who was, ended up being my first husband. He was a wonderful dad and very understanding of all my crazy idiosyncrasies or foibles. And I really appreciated that. A month before we got married, I went on the pill. And within that very first month after we were married, I was already having blood clots taken out of my jugular vein. So that was very tricky, not having that data that, hey, you have a clotting disorder as part of your unique genetic function. Would have been nice to know. Well, my firstborn child was tricky. I didn't know I was pregnant going off the pill. I didn't have a cycle for a year and a half. And before I even had a normal cycle, I was pregnant. Could not figure out why I wasn't getting better after that graduation party. And so it wasn't a 6-week hangover, it was pregnancy. So I found out I was pregnant when I was 13 weeks and had a very preemie baby. And he was tricky. They were feeding him a milk formula through his head, the little styrofoam cup, and I was so worried about him. If I was sensitive to milk, he probably was too. And when we got him back home, of course, he was, projectile vomiting. He was sensitive to dairy, so we had to get him off of that. He had sensitivities. He walked at 7.5 months, which for a preemie is unusual. It was challenging. He talked early and read early, and he wanted me to become an astronaut so that I could tell him what was in the black hole when he was 4, and it was exhausting. But he had the same sensory issues that I did. He wore pajamas everywhere. He would have worn them to kindergarten if I would have let him, but of course I didn't. And he was really smart, so I had the makings of an undiagnosed Asperger's, kiddo number 1. My second child was also a preemie baby. She made it about 3 weeks longer. There was some better technology. I had 4 IVs waiting for her to get there. I spent 5 months in the hospital waiting for her to be born, and pretty much lost my sanity during that hospital stay. I had a less than 2-year-old that was only allowed to see me brief periods of time. And, he would run into the room and punch all the buttons and pull the cord in the bathroom, and they would expect that he should leave. And it was hard not being with him, and then, having all these people in the hospital that wanted to touch me and probe me and ask me questions. And it was a really stressful time. The noise and the waking you up, and my mom actually would bring me the soft house shoes so I could throw them at the people to keep them out of the room, which was really nice. I appreciated that. But she was healthier than baby number 1. She made it longer in utero, and she was early, and she didn't have to stay in the hospital as long, so that was really nice. She did not have the same sensitivities that my first child and I have, which was a really wonderful blessing. She spent some time under the Billy lights, with the blindfold on, some of the things that preemie children, can be challenged with, but of course, full-term ones can be as well. It was really tricky for me having 2 preemies and all the hospital experience, and I know that everyone thought, okay, the babies are home and now everything's going to be fine, but unfortunately I began falling apart. One of my colleagues told me that she really thought that what I had was a postpartum psychosis. I really feel that with the complication of being Asperger's, and that it really was more, postpartum depression with all these complications added to it. The steps for getting healthy were significant. I needed movement, right, to get rid of some of those excessive excitatory neurotransmitters. I had to look back on the things that had me healthier. I had to just really get rid of all the things that we typically thought about in the US about depression and anxiety. I ate differently. I began getting rid of dairy and gluten in my life. And I knew that the information was in there. I had a degree in scientific nutrition, so get back to the basics. What was it that I was doing when I could sleep? What was happening in my life where I felt good and I wasn't gaining weight every time there was an emotional issue happening? And that's really where I started. In 2002, I moved to Austin and began working for a compounding pharmacy. And it was really amazing at the insight that they had, because compounding is the old school way of making medications. But there was also a big movement for looking at the foundational things that cause dysfunction. And one of the first things that occurred is an old pharmacist told me that I looked progesterone deficient. And I thought, what does that look like? I had spent all this time, working in hospital pharmacy and in healthcare administration in Houston. I had no idea what that looked like, but I thought, fine, I'll buy this $32 bottle of whatever and take it home and slather it on. And I slept through the night, and I was completely astounded. So I had a very nice job that I had was going to be working in Houston, but I went to work for this pharmacy for $12 an hour, and it was really one of the best things that I could have done. I learned so much about implementing what I already knew, about putting the nutrients in, and really getting to the basis of dysfunction. So we were doing so many things, reading so many books, but what we were missing is testing. We couldn't quantify what was going on. So we had a few tests that we would do in the pharmacy, and the owner was lovely and let me bring in different kind of testing and books, and we learned. But I went to a conference in 2002, and I ran into a biochemist who had done a huge study on neurotransmitters in urine. And he handed me a test kit, and he said, "You should test one of your patients." And I thought, I'm the craziest person I know. I'm testing myself. So I went back and performed this urine test and mailed it off. And about a week later, after I was significantly better, you can imagine, I was now a functional person. I was in Austin, and, my children, I shared my children with my ex-husband, and, everything was going really well. But I got this neurotransmitter test back, and they were terrible. And we had been doing 24-hour studies to look at amino acids to balance folks' brain, but that didn't tell us what the brain chemicals were. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is so great. So I started treating myself and taking amino acids to balance my brain chemistry. And I didn't know that you could feel that way. I didn't know other people felt that good, that they slept and that they weren't terrified of falling out of their car or, the roof caving in on the house. I didn't know fully what normalcy was like. I'm sure my brain had been imbalanced my whole life. So that was a very exciting time. One of the things that was probably the most profound for me is I had been doing my therapy for 6 months, and I went to the refrigerator and I opened the door, and a typical thing for me would be to eat cookie dough or any kind of carbohydrate that I could find, find a bagel and put something on it and eat it. And I realized that I wasn't hungry. So my brain didn't crave carbohydrates in the same way. And it was so exciting. And I thought, I just might have it right. So when I went back to the pharmacy, I tested immediately, and it came back, and I was so close. My serotonin's never really optimal, but I was so excited that there was hope. And then I realized that we had all these people that we'd been talking to for years in the pharmacy that would come in, and they were failing medication therapy, and they weren't getting better, and they were so desperate for their children. And we just brought the testing in, and we started, and we got really good at it. We inherited a study at one point where the children that didn't qualify for the study, we started helping them. And it was really very satisfying to have a way to quantify an imbalance like that. It was so interesting. We got to where I was having to write the protocols for other clinicians. And there were so many people outside my office, I thought, wow, this is not going to scale. I've got to do something about this. But the funny thing about that time, I realized that I might be able to have a successful relationship. So I started dating, and I met my husband. And of course, I tested his brain before I married him. That's definitely a must. But we started a brain balancing company, and that was an exciting time. We learned pretty rapidly that we needed this plug and play capability for clinicians. Was really important for them to learn everything that we had learned with so many people at a pharmacy group. With multiple pharmacies providing patients, we learned a lot quickly, and also with the study. But in our own practice, we figured out that there's all these other tests are necessary. And we had to make sure that the gut was healthy in order for the brain to be healthy. And we needed to look at hormones and vitamin D and the thyroid. There were so many factors that come into play for someone to be really healthy. You just don't want to fix the finger, you want to fix the whole body. So that was the genesis of Wellnicity. I asked my business partners, can we please do something to offer all this testing to the masses? And so it's been a really long journey and a very exciting one, but now we have test kits where we can really help folks get answers to things that they might not have had answers to before. Scaling the business, it was so important to have a robust technology platform, one where we could say, when we treat something this way with a person that weighs this amount and is on this medication and they have these symptoms, this is what we find works best. And we're a true nutritional model. We stay in our lane. I think it's important to be the foundational folks. What are you eating? What are you doing to help yourself? Are you walking? Are you doing yoga? What's right for your body type? And, in the last number of years, we added genomic testing, nutrigenomic testing to be specific, not just regular genetics. And for me, of course, I tested myself first and I got it back and I went, wow, if I had just had this information, it said that I have a clotting disorder, which I do, clearly. And it told me that, like a typical Asperger's person, I was going to have problems with neurotransmitters, both synthesizing them, breaking them down, detoxification, inflammation. And, so that's an added feature. We're continually bringing things in, to help the client find what it is that is the piece to their puzzle. Having that information, if my parents had a roadmap for me, I think things would have been vastly different. I had a family just yesterday that tested 2 of the children, and they're definitely on the spectrum, and we had so much to offer, because then okay, this is going to be a challenge, but let's start early. We found out that they were sensitive to gluten, which is very common, and that dairy was not going to be their friend either. And, let's really do the things to help them detoxify, clean chemicals in the home. All of those things play a role. It's not just supplements and food, it's also environment. The mom had already figured out she needed to take the carpet out of her house because the boys were sensitive to mold and dust mites. So it really is important to have a completely holistic view of how to implement improvement. And I hope for other folks not to have to spend 25 to 30 years figuring it out.